At 30,000 feet, death doesn't ask permission. When biotech billionaire Claire Vaughn's throat started closing mid-flight, every passenger in first class became a spectator to her final moments. Phones came out. People whispered. Nobody moved, except the exhausted man in row 14 wearing shoes held together with duct tape. Adrian Cole hadn't saved a life in 3 years, not since the night his wife died in his arms, because an insurance company decided her life wasn't worth the cost. Now he had 60 seconds to decide if he still remembered how to fight death itself. If you want to see how a single moment can destroy and rebuild 2 lives, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The Seattle-Tacoma airport smelled like burnt coffee and desperation at 11:47 on a Thursday night. Adrian Cole stood in the security line with his daughter's small hand gripped tight in his, watching her yawn against his hip. Emma was 7 years old and wearing the same pink jacket she'd worn for the past 2 winters, because he couldn't afford a new one. The zipper was broken. He'd fixed it twice with safety pins. "Daddy, I'm sleepy," she whispered. "I know, baby. Just a little longer." His back hurt, his feet hurt, everything hurt in that dull, permanent way that came from working 60-hour weeks driving deliveries through rain-soaked streets while living on 4 hours of sleep. He'd showered before coming to the airport, but he could still smell the stale French fries and motor oil that seemed permanently embedded in his skin. The TSA agent barely glanced at their IDs before waving them through. Adrian carried their single shared duffel bag. Everything they owned that mattered fit inside it, and held Emma's hand as they walked toward the gate. He'd bought the cheapest tickets available, a red-eye flight to Spokane with a layover in Portland. His father was dying. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctor said maybe 2 weeks. Adrian hadn't seen his father in 18 months. Not because he didn't want to, because he couldn't afford the time off work, couldn't afford the tickets, couldn't afford anything except keeping Emma fed and their electricity on. He'd finally scraped together enough for these tickets by skipping meals and selling his wedding ring to a pawn shop on Aurora Avenue. The guy behind the counter offered him $200. Adrian took it without negotiating. Now they sat at gate C7, waiting. Emma fell asleep against his shoulder. Adrian stared at the departures board and tried not to think about how thin she'd gotten, how her school counselor had pulled him aside last month to ask if everything was okay at home. Everything was not okay at home. But what the hell was he supposed to say? Much sex. 3 gates away, Claire Vaughn scrolled through acquisition documents on her tablet while her assistant hovered nearby with an espresso and a printout of tomorrow's board meeting agenda. The Portland team confirmed the meeting for 8 a.m. Her assistant said. "The merger contracts are ready for signatures. Legal says everything's clean." Claire didn't look up. "It's never clean. Tell them I want another review before I sign anything." "Yes, ma'am." Who? At 30 years old, Claire Vaughn controlled a biotech empire worth $3.2 billion. She'd built Helix Biosolutions from a Stanford dorm room startup into one of the fastest-growing pharmaceutical companies in North America. She owned patents on 17 different medications. She employed 4,000 people across 6 states. She was also exhausted in a way that sleep never fixed. Tonight she was flying to Portland to finalize the acquisition of MedBridge Therapeutics, a smaller pharmaceutical company that specialized in experimental treatments for autoimmune disorders. The deal was worth $900 million. Her board called it a smart move. Her competitors called it ruthless. Claire called it Thursday. She wore a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, diamond earrings that caught the fluorescent terminal lights, and an expression that made strangers instinctively step out of her way. Her assistant handed her the espresso. Claire took it without saying thank you. She'd stopped saying thank you somewhere around year 2 of running the company. Gratitude felt like weakness. Weakness invited exploitation. She'd learned that lesson early and never forgotten it. "Boarding starts in 20 minutes, her assistant said. Claire nodded. She noticed briefly a man 3 gates down holding a sleeping child. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His jacket was worn thin at the elbows. His shoes had duct tape holding the sole together. She looked away. Other people's problems weren't her concern. The flight boarded late. Adrian carried Emma down the jetway, her head resting against his neck, her breath warm against his collar. He'd paid extra, money he didn't have, for a window seat so she could look outside if she woke up. They were in row 14, economy, near the back of the plane. Claire Vaughn sat in row 3, first class, with her assistant across the aisle and enough legroom to stretch out comfortably. The plane was half empty. It was a Thursday red-eye to Portland. Most people had better places to be. Adrian buckled Emma into her seat and tucked his jacket around her like a blanket. She mumbled something incoherent and curled against the window. He sat beside her and stared at the seat back in front of him. He was thinking about his father, thinking about how the last conversation they'd had ended with his father asking when he'd stop punishing himself, and Adrian hanging up without answering. That was 18 months ago. Now his father was dying, and Adrian was flying across the state to say goodbye to a man he loved and resented in equal measure. The flight attendants went through their safety demonstration. Nobody paid attention. The plane taxied. The engines roared. They lifted into the night sky over Seattle, the city lights spreading below them like scattered diamonds. Adrian closed his eyes. Claire was reviewing the merger documents for the third time when she felt the tightness start in her chest. It was subtle at first, just a faint pressure, like someone had wrapped a rubber band around her lungs and was slowly pulling it tighter. She ignored it. She'd been ignoring her body's warning signs for years. Migraines, insomnia, chest pain, dizziness. All of it got shoved aside because she didn't have time to be sick. Sick meant weak. Weak meant vulnerable. But the pressure kept building. Her throat started to itch, then burn. She swallowed hard and reached for her water bottle. Her hands were shaking slightly. That was wrong. Claire Vaughn's hands never shook. Across the aisle, her assistant was asleep with noise-canceling headphones on. Claire tried to take a deep breath. She couldn't. Her airway was closing. Panic hit her like a freight train. She stood up fast, stumbling slightly, and her tablet clattered to the floor. A flight attendant looked over from the galley. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Claire tried to answer, but her throat wouldn't work. She couldn't get air. The burning sensation spread from her throat into her chest, her face, her arms. Her vision started to blur at the edges. Anaphylaxis. She was having a severe allergic reaction. Her brain, still functioning in that cold analytical way, even as her body shut down, started cataloging possibilities. She'd eaten a salad before boarding. Walnuts. She was allergic to walnuts, but she'd been careful. She always checked ingredients. Her knees buckled. She hit the floor hard. The cabin erupted into chaos. Take. Adrian heard the commotion from 14 rows back. He opened his eyes and saw passengers standing, craning their necks toward first class. A flight attendant was running down the aisle. Someone shouted for a doctor. Emma stirred beside him. "Daddy?" "Stay here, baby." He unbuckled and moved into the aisle before his brain fully registered what he was doing. Old instincts kicking in. Muscle memory from a lifetime ago when he used to run toward emergencies instead of away from them. He pushed through this crowd gathering near row 3. A woman was on the floor, convulsing. Her face was swollen, lips turning blue. Her eyes were open but unfocused. A flight attendant knelt beside her, panicking. "Does anyone have medical training?" the attendant shouted. "We need help!" Adrian's mouth went dry. He hadn't worked as a nurse in 3 years, hadn't touched a patient, hadn't run a code, hadn't saved a life since the night his wife died on a gurney, while he held her hand and begged doctors to try the experimental treatment her insurance had denied. He'd walked away from medicine after that. Told himself he was done watching people die because someone in an office building decided their life wasn't worth the cost. But now there was a woman dying on an airplane floor, and nobody else was moving. "Get back," he said. His voice came out hoarse but steady. The flight attendant looked up at him. "Are you a doctor?" "Close enough. Move." Adrian dropped to his knees beside the woman. Her pulse was rapid and thready. Her airway was almost completely closed. She had maybe 90 seconds before her brain started dying from oxygen deprivation. "Do you have an emergency medical kit?" he asked. "Yes, I'll get it. Now. And find me an EpiPen." The attendant ran. Adrian tilted the woman's head back, trying to open her airway. Her face was so swollen he almost didn't recognize her as human. But her eyes, those sharp, terrified eyes, locked onto his. She was still conscious, still aware she was dying. "Listen to me," Adrian said quietly. "I'm going to help you, but I need you to stay calm. Nod, if you understand." She managed the smallest movement of her head. "Good. Keep breathing. Even if it feels impossible, keep trying." His hands were shaking now. He hadn't done this in 3 years, and everything felt wrong. felt distant, like watching himself perform through thick glass. The flight attendant returned with the medical kit and 2 EpiPens. Adrian grabbed one, checked the dosage, and slammed it into the woman's thigh without hesitating. Nothing happened. Her airway stayed closed. "Come on," he muttered. "Come on." 30 seconds passed. Her lips were completely blue now. Her pulse was weakening. Adrian grabbed the second EpiPen. "This is either going to save you or kill you faster," he said. "I'm sorry." He administered the second dose. For 5 agonizing seconds, nothing changed. Then her body spasmed violently, and she sucked in a massive, ragged breath. Her airway opened, air flooded her lungs. Color started returning to her face. Adrian sagged back against the seats, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. The woman was breathing, shallow, painful breaths, but breathing. "We need to land," he told the flight attendant. "Now, she needs a hospital." The attendant nodded and ran toward the cockpit. Adrian stayed on the floor beside the woman, monitoring her pulse, watching her chest rise and fall. She was staring at him with those sharp eyes, still terrified but aware now, aware she'd almost died, aware someone had saved her. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. She tried to speak, but her throat was too damaged. "Don't talk," he said. "Just rest." Around them, passengers were filming on their phones. Adrian ignored them. He'd learned a long time ago that people loved watching strangers suffer as long as they could do it from a safe distance. 10 minutes later, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom announcing an emergency landing in Portland. The plane descended rapidly. Adrian stayed beside the woman until the wheels hit the runway and paramedics boarded the aircraft. They took over immediately, loading her onto a stretcher and rushing her toward a waiting ambulance. One of the paramedics, a young guy with buzzed hair, looked at Adrian. "You're the one who stabilized her." "Yeah. Nice work. You a doctor?" "Used to be something like that." The paramedic nodded and followed the stretcher out. Adrian stood there in the aisle, suddenly aware of how many people were staring at him. The flight attendants were thanking him. Passengers were asking if he was okay, telling him he was a hero. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man who remembered how to stop someone from dying. That didn't make him special. It just made him tired. He walked back to row 14 where Emma was awake now, wide-eyed and clutching his jacket. "Daddy, what happened?" "Someone got sick, baby, but she's okay now." "Did you help her?" He nodded. Emma hugged him tight. "You're the best daddy." Adrian closed his eyes and held his daughter and tried not to think about how the woman on the floor had the same terrified expression his wife had worn in her final moments. He'd saved this stranger, but he couldn't save the person who mattered most. That truth sat in his chest like broken glass. By the time paramedics cleared the scene and the plane finally took off again toward Portland, Claire Vaughn was already in a private room at Portland Medical Center, hooked up to IV fluids and antihistamines while doctors monitored her vitals. Her assistant stood in the corner, on the phone with Claire's legal team. Claire's throat still burned. Her face was still swollen, but she was alive. And she couldn't stop thinking about the man who'd saved her. He'd knelt beside her on that airplane floor and looked at her like she was just another person, not a billionaire CEO, not someone famous, just a human being who needed help. Nobody had looked at Claire like that in years. Most people saw her money first, her power, her reputation. But this man, whoever he was, had seen her dying and decided that mattered more than anything else. "Find him," Claire said. Her assistant stopped mid-sentence on the phone. "What?" "The man who helped me on the plane. Find out who he is." "Ma'am, you should rest. Find him." Her assistant nodded and stepped into the hallway. Claire stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the man's face. Tired eyes, worn clothes, hands that shook but moved with absolute certainty. He'd saved her life. And then he'd disappeared. Adrian and Emma finally arrived in Spokane at 3 in the morning. They took a taxi to the hospital where Adrian's father was in hospice care. The driver didn't ask questions. Adrian was grateful for that. The hospital was quiet. A nurse directed them to room 427. Adrian hesitated outside the door. Emma tugged on his hand. "Isn't that Grandpa's room?" "Yeah. Aren't we going in?" Adrian took a breath and pushed the door open. His father looked smaller than he remembered. Thinner. The cancer had eaten away everything except bone and stubbornness. But his eyes were still sharp, still aware. "Took you long enough?" his father said, voice rough. Adrian felt Emma's hand slip out of his as she ran to the bedside. "Grandpa!" His father smiled, actually smiled, and reached out to touch her hair. "Hey, sweetheart." Adrian stayed near the door. His father looked at him over Emma's head. "You look like hell." "Oh, yeah, well, it's been a long night." "I heard about the plane thing. Nurse showed me the video." Adrian's stomach dropped. "What video?" "You didn't know? Someone filmed you saving that woman. It's all over the internet. Couple million views already." "That's not—" "I didn't—" His father waved a skeletal hand dismissively. "Doesn't matter. You did good, kid." Adrian didn't know what to say to that. Emma climbed carefully onto the bed beside her grandfather, and Adrian watched them together, his daughter and his dying father, and felt the weight of everything he'd lost pressing down on him like gravity had doubled. He'd saved a stranger tonight, but he couldn't save the people he loved, and that truth was going to follow him for the rest of his life. Adrian's father died 4 days later, on a Monday morning, while Emma was eating breakfast in the hospital cafeteria. Adrian was alone with him when it happened. His father had been unconscious for 18 hours, breathing in shallow, irregular gasps that sounded like someone drowning on dry land. Then the breathing just stopped. No final words. No dramatic moment. Just silence. Adrian sat there for 10 minutes before he pressed the call button for the nurse. The funeral was small. 8 people showed up, mostly neighbors his father had known for decades. Adrian wore the same clothes he'd worn on the plane because he didn't own anything else appropriate. Emma wore her pink jacket with the broken zipper. They buried his father in a cemetery outside Spokane, where the grass was yellow and dying from lack of rain. The whole thing took 40 minutes. Afterward, Adrian and Emma stood beside the grave while everyone else left. "Are you sad, Daddy?" Emma asked. "Yeah, baby, I'm sad." "Me too." She leaned against him and Adrian put his arm around her shoulders and stared at the fresh dirt covering his father's casket. He kept waiting to feel something bigger than the dull ache in his chest, some profound grief or regret or closure. But all he felt was tired. They flew back to Seattle the next day on another cheap red-eye flight. Adrian had already missed a week of work. His supervisor had texted him twice asking when he'd be back. He'd responded with "soon" both times because he didn't know what else to say. His father had left him nothing except an old house full of furniture nobody wanted and $17,000 in medical debt. Adrian added it to the pile. When they landed at SeaTac, it was raining. Of course it was raining. This was Seattle. It rained 200 days a year, and Adrian had stopped noticing sometime around year 2. They took the bus home because Adrian couldn't afford a taxi. Emma fell asleep against the window. Adrian stared at his reflection in the glass and barely recognized the man staring back. He looked 45. He was 32. Their apartment was in Renton, a 30-minute bus ride from the airport. It was a 1-bedroom unit in a building that smelled like mildew and cigarette smoke. The rent was $900 a month, and Adrian was already 2 weeks late on October's payment. He carried Emma inside and put her to bed still wearing her jacket because the heat didn't work, and the landlord kept promising to fix it, but never did. Then he sat on the couch in the dark and checked his phone. 43 unread messages. Most of them were from numbers he didn't recognize. A few were from reporters asking for interviews about the airplane incident. One was from a local news station offering him $500 to come on camera and talk about what happened. Adrian deleted them all. The last message was from his supervisor. "Need you back tomorrow or we're filling your position." Adrian closed his eyes. Tomorrow was Wednesday. He'd been gone 9 days. 9 days without pay. 9 days falling further behind on rent, on bills, on everything. He texted back, "I'll be there." Then he sat in the dark and listened to the rain hammer against the windows and tried to figure out how the hell he was going to keep surviving. He didn't have an answer. Somewhere across the city, Claire Vaughn was having the same problem. Claire had been discharged from the hospital after 2 days of observation. The allergic reaction had been severe but not fatal, thanks to whoever that man was on the plane. The doctors told her she was lucky. Claire didn't feel lucky. She felt humiliated. She'd built an empire on control and discipline. She didn't have allergic reactions in public. She didn't collapse on airplane floors. She didn't need strangers to save her life. but it had happened anyway. And now she couldn't stop thinking about the man who'd saved her. Her head of security, a former FBI agent named Marcus Chen, sat across from her in the conference room at Helix Biosolutions headquarters. He'd spent the past week tracking down every piece of information available about the incident. His name is Adrian Cole, Marcus said, sliding a folder across the table. 32 years old, lives in Renton, single father, works as a delivery driver for a logistics company called Fast Fleet. Claire opened the folder. Inside was a photo pulled from an old hospital ID badge. Adrian looked younger in the picture, cleaner, more put together. He was smiling slightly. Before the delivery job, he worked as a trauma nurse at Harborview Medical Center, Marcus continued. One of their best, according to former colleagues. Then his wife got sick 3 years ago. Autoimmune disorder, rare type. She needed an experimental treatment. Claire's chest tightened. And? Her insurance denied coverage, said it was investigational and not medically necessary. She died 6 weeks later. The words hit Claire like a fist. What insurance company? She asked quietly. Marcus hesitated. One Health Solutions. Claire knew that name. One Health Solutions had been acquired by MedBridge Therapeutics 4 years ago, and MedBridge had just been acquired by Helix Biosolutions, which meant One Health now belonged to Claire. The treatment his wife needed, Claire said. What was it? Marcus flipped through his notes. Something called Immunotech 7, experimental monoclonal antibody therapy. It was being developed by a biotech startup in San Diego. Who owned the startup? MedBridge Therapeutics bought them out in 2019. They shelved the research after the acquisition. Claire's hands were shaking. She owned the company that denied Adrian's wife treatment. She owned the research that could have saved her. And she'd shelved it because her analysts determined it wasn't profitable enough to continue development. Where is he now? Claire asked. Back in Seattle. Started working his delivery job again yesterday. Claire stared at the photo of Adrian. The man who'd saved her life had lost his wife because of a company she now controlled. A company that put profit margins ahead of human lives. She'd spent 10 years building Helix into a pharmaceutical empire, telling herself she was helping people, that developing new medications and treatments was noble work. But the truth was staring at her from inside this folder. She'd built her empire on the backs of people like Adrian's wife, people who died because someone in a boardroom decided their life wasn't worth the expense. I want to meet him, Claire said. Marcus frowned. Ma'am, I don't think that's... I want to meet him. Arrange it. He's not going to agree to a meeting. He disappeared from the hospital before you could thank him. He's been ignoring calls from reporters. He clearly doesn't want attention. Then don't make it about attention. Tell him I want to thank him privately. And if he refuses? Claire looked at Marcus. He won't refuse. Us. But Adrian did refuse. When Marcus showed up at the Fast Fleet Distribution Center 3 days later and asked to speak with Adrian Cole, he was directed to a man loading boxes into a delivery van in the parking lot. Adrian looked worse than his file photo. Thinner, more exhausted, like someone who'd given up on sleep as a concept. Adrian Cole? Marcus asked. Adrian glanced over. Yeah, my name is Marcus Chen. I work for Claire Vaughn. Adrian's expression didn't change. Good for you. Ms. Vaughn would like to meet with you. She wants to thank you for what you did on the plane. I don't need thanks. She's prepared to offer compensation for your time. Adrian slammed the van door harder than necessary. I said I don't need thanks, and I don't want compensation. Tell your boss I'm glad she's alive, but I'm not interested in whatever this is. He walked past Marcus toward the warehouse. Marcus followed. Mr. Cole, she's offering $50,000 just for a 1-hour meeting. Adrian stopped walking. $50,000 was more money than he'd seen in 3 years. It was rent for a year. It was Emma's school supplies and winter clothes and fixing the heat in their apartment. It was not lying awake at night calculating which bills he could skip this month. Why? Adrian asked. Because you saved her life. I kept her breathing for 10 minutes. The paramedics saved her life. That's not how she sees it. Adrian turned around. Marcus was standing there in an expensive suit, looking calm and professional, like offering strangers $50,000 was something he did every Tuesday. What does she want? Adrian asked. Just to talk. Nobody pays $50,000 just to talk. Miss Vaughn does. Adrian wanted to say no, wanted to tell this guy to leave him alone, that he didn't care how rich Claire Vaughn was or how grateful she felt. But $50,000. 1 hour, Adrian said. That's it. Marcus nodded. I'll send you the details. The meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at a private office in downtown Seattle. Marcus sent a car to pick up Adrian from his apartment, a black sedan with leather seats and a driver who didn't speak the entire ride. Adrian felt like he was being transported to his own execution. Emma was spending the day with a neighbor, Mrs. Kim, who sometimes watched her when Adrian worked late. He told her he had a job interview. It wasn't technically a lie. The car pulled up to a glass tower on 4th Avenue. Marcus met him in the lobby and escorted him to the top floor where Helix Biosolutions occupied the entire level. The office was all white walls and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Everything looked expensive and impersonal, like a museum exhibit about corporate success. Claire Vaughn was standing near the windows when Adrian walked in. She looked different than she had on the plane, healthier, put together. She wore black slacks and a gray blouse, and her hair was pulled back in a way that probably had a specific name Adrian didn't know. But her eyes were the same, sharp, intelligent, terrified. She was scared of this meeting. That surprised him. Mr. Cole, she said, thank you for coming. You paid me to come. Fair point. She gestured toward a chair. Please, sit. Adrian sat. Claire sat across from him. Marcus stood near the door like a Secret Service agent. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Claire said, I'm sorry about your father. Adrian's stomach dropped. How do you... I did research. I wanted to understand who saved my life. Oh, you mean you had someone investigate me? Yes. At least she was honest about it. Adrian stood up. We're done here. Mr. Cole, please. You want to thank me? Fine, you're welcome. You want to throw money at me to make yourself feel better? Keep it. I don't need your charity. He was halfway to the door when Claire said, Your wife died because of my company. Adrian froze. The insurance company that denied her treatment is owned by a pharmaceutical company I acquired 2 years ago, Claire continued. The experimental therapy she needed was developed by a research team I bought out and then shut down because it wasn't profitable enough. Adrian turned around slowly. Claire was still sitting, but her hands were clenched together in her lap so tight her knuckles were white. I didn't know, she said. I didn't know your wife specifically. I didn't know about her case, but I knew what my company was doing. I knew we were denying treatments to cut costs. I knew people were dying because of decisions made in boardrooms by people like me. Adrian's vision blurred at the edges. So, no, Claire said quietly, this isn't about charity. This is about the fact that I owe you a debt I can never repay. You saved my life, and my company destroyed yours. Adrian wanted to scream at her, wanted to flip the table and break the expensive furniture and make her feel a fraction of the pain he'd carried for 3 years. But he just stood there. Why are you telling me this, Shyam? He asked. Because you deserve to know, and because I want to fix it. You can't fix it. My wife is dead. I know, but I can fix what my company is doing to other people. Adrian laughed. It came out bitter and harsh. You're a billionaire CEO. You don't give a damn about other people. You're right, Claire said. I didn't, but then I almost died on an airplane floor, and the only person who tried to help me was a man who had every reason to let me die. I didn't know who you were. What warrior? Exactly. You helped me because I was a person who needed help, not because of who I was or what I could do for you. She stood up. That's not how my world works, Mr. Cole. In my world, everything is transactional. Everything has a price. People don't do things out of basic human decency. Maybe you just know terrible people. I am terrible people. The honesty in her voice caught him off guard. Claire walked to the window and stared out at the city. I've spent 10 years building this company, making money, winning, and I told myself it was worth it because I was developing medications that helped people. But I was lying to myself. She turned to face him. I wasn't helping people. I was helping shareholders, and people like your wife paid the price. Adrian didn't know what to say to that. I want to change how this company operates, Claire said. I want to rebuild it into something that actually helps people instead of just extracting profit from their suffering. But I can't do it alone. I need someone who understands what it's like on the other side. Someone who's lived through what this industry does to people. You want to hire me? No, I want you to help me burn it down and build something better. Adrian stared at her like she'd lost her mind. You're serious? Completely. Your board would never allow it. My board doesn't control me. I'm the majority shareholder. I can do whatever I want. Then why haven't you already done it? But Claire was quiet for a long moment. Because I was scared, she said finally. Scared of losing money, losing respect, losing control. But then I spent 2 days in a hospital room thinking about how close I came to dying. And I realized something. What? I don't want to die knowing I spent my entire life making the world worse. Adrian sat down heavily in the chair. This was insane. Claire Vaughn was offering him a chance to tear apart the same system that killed his wife. To actually change something instead of just surviving day to day. But it felt like a trap. What would this actually look like? He asked. Claire sat down across from him again. We launch a new division focused on accessibility, lower medication costs, fund treatments for people who can't afford them, partner with hospitals to provide care regardless of insurance status. That would cost millions, billions probably, but I have billions, and I'd rather spend them on something that matters than on another merger or acquisition. Your investors will revolt. Let them. Adrian rubbed his face. This is crazy. I know. You're asking me to trust you, but I don't know you, and you represent everything I hate about this industry. I know that too. So why the hell would I say yes? Claire leaned forward. Because you're angry, and you have every right to be, and I'm offering you a chance to turn that anger into something that might actually save lives. She was right. Adrian was angry. He'd been angry for 3 years, carrying it around like stones in his pockets, letting it drag him down deeper every day. And here was someone offering him a chance to do something with it. I have conditions, Adrian said. Name them. I'm not your employee. I'm not your charity case. If we do this, we're partners. Agreed. I don't move to some fancy office. I keep living my life. I keep working my job until I know this is real. Understood. And if I think you're lying to me, if I think this is just PR or some guilt-driven phase you're going through, I walk away. Claire nodded. Fair. Adrian stood up. I need time to think about it. Take all the time you need. He walked to the door, then stopped. Why me? You could hire consultants, experts, people who actually know how to run a healthcare company. Claire smiled slightly. It was the first real expression he'd seen on her face. Because experts would tell me all the reasons it can't be done, she said. I need someone who's angry enough not to care about the reasons. Adrian left without responding. The car drove him back to Renton in silence. When he got home, Emma was watching cartoons with Mrs. Kim. Adrian thanked her, paid her $20 he couldn't afford, and sent her home. Then he sat on the couch next to his daughter. How was your interview? Emma asked. Weird. Did you get the job? I don't know yet. Emma leaned against him. I hope you did. Then maybe we could get a place with heat that works. Adrian's chest ached. She was 7 years old and her biggest dream was an apartment with working heat. Yeah, baby, he said quietly. Maybe we could. That night, after Emma fell asleep, Adrian pulled out his phone and searched for Claire Vaughn. The internet had a lot to say about her. Youngest self-made female billionaire in pharmaceutical history. Ruthless negotiator. Brilliant strategist. Ice queen. Corporate shark. Nobody called her kind. Nobody called her human. Adrian found an interview she'd given to Forbes 2 years ago. The interviewer asked her about criticism that pharmaceutical companies prioritize profit over patients. Claire's response: every industry prioritizes profit. That's how capitalism works. The difference is, we're honest about it. The Adrian from 3 years ago, the one who still believed in saving people, would have walked away from this. But the Adrian who existed now, the one who'd spent 3 years watching his daughter go hungry because he couldn't afford groceries, the one who'd sold his wedding ring for $200, that Adrian wanted revenge, and Claire Vaughn was offering him a weapon. He texted the number Marcus had given him. I'm in, but we do this my way. The response came 2 minutes later. Your way. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Same location. Adrian set his phone down and stared at the ceiling. He had no idea if this was the right decision. But it was a decision. And he'd been drifting for 3 years, letting life happen to him instead of fighting back. Maybe it was time to start fighting. The next morning, Adrian showed up at the Helix building at 9 sharp. This time he took the bus because he refused to let Claire send a car. He was wearing the same worn jeans and faded jacket he always wore. He didn't own anything else. Marcus met him in the lobby again and escorted him upstairs. Claire was waiting in the conference room with a lawyer and 3 executives Adrian didn't recognize. Mr. Cole, she said, these are the people who run the day-to-day operations at Helix. I wanted them to hear your perspective. The executives looked at Adrian like he'd tracked mud across their expensive carpet. My perspective, Adrian said, on what we're doing wrong. Adrian sat down. You want the full list or just the highlights? One of the executives, a woman in her 50s with silver hair, frowned. Ms. Vaughn, I'm not sure this is... Tell them, Claire said, looking at Adrian. So Adrian told them. He told them about insurance companies denying treatments because it was cheaper to let people die than to approve expensive medications. He told them about pharmaceutical companies jacking up prices on life-saving drugs because they could. He told them about people rationing insulin and skipping chemotherapy and choosing between rent and prescriptions. He told them about his wife, about holding her hand while she died because someone in an office decided her life wasn't worth $40,000. By the time he finished, the room was silent. The silver-haired executive looked pale. One of the others was staring at the table. This is what our industry does, Adrian said. Every single day. And you all know it. You just don't care because you're not the ones dying. Claire turned to her executives. He's right. And we're going to fix it. Ms. Vaughn, the silver-haired woman said carefully, with all due respect, what you're proposing would fundamentally alter our business model. Our shareholders will deal with it. They won't. They'll remove you as CEO. Then I'll buy them out. The room went silent again. You can't buy out every investor, one of the executives said. Watch me. Claire stood up. This company is going to change. Starting today, we're launching an accessibility program that will provide medications at cost to anyone who can't afford them. We're going to stop denying insurance claims for experimental treatments. And we're going to partner with hospitals to fund care for uninsured patients. That will cost hundreds of millions, the lawyer said. Then we'll spend hundreds of millions. The executives looked at each other like they were witnessing a suicide. If you can't support this direction, Claire said, you're welcome to resign. I'll provide generous severance packages. But if you stay, you follow the new plan. Nobody resigned, but Adrian could see the resentment in their eyes. These people thought Claire had lost her mind. Maybe she had. After the meeting, Claire walked Adrian to the elevator. That went well, Adrian said dryly. They hate it. I noticed. They'll come around or they won't. Either way, we're doing this. The elevator arrived. Adrian stepped inside. I meant what I said yesterday, Claire said. We're partners in this. I'm not your boss. Then what are you? Claire thought about it. Someone trying to fix a mistake before it's too late. The elevator doors started to close. See you tomorrow, Claire said. Adrian rode down to the lobby, wondering what the hell he'd just gotten himself into. He had a feeling he was about to find out. The first real fight happened 3 weeks later, in a boardroom on the 34th floor while rain hammered against the windows. Claire had just announced the launch of the Helix Accessibility Initiative to her full board of directors. 15 men and women in expensive suits who collectively controlled 42% of the company's voting shares. They looked at her like she'd suggested burning the building down. You want to give away medications, one of them said. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I want to provide them at cost to people who can't afford market price, Claire corrected. That's the same thing. No, it's not. We'll still cover production and distribution costs. We just won't be adding a 300% markup. A man named Richard Castellano, who'd been on the board since before Claire took over as CEO, leaned back in his chair. He was 68 years old and had the kind of face that looked permanently disappointed. Claire, we've discussed this in private, and I was hoping you'd reconsider. But since you're moving forward, I'll say this publicly. What you're proposing is financial suicide. Basitkin ikatis. Our profit margins will decrease by approximately 18%, Claire said. We'll still be profitable. 18% is billions of dollars. I'm aware. Money we could be investing in research and development. We'll still be investing in research and development, just less in executive bonuses. That got a reaction. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Richard's jaw tightened. This isn't about bonuses, he said. This is about fiduciary responsibility. We have an obligation to our shareholders to maximize profits. Adrian, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner watching this whole thing unfold, finally spoke up. You have an obligation not to let people die because they're poor. Every head in the room turned toward him. Richard looked at Claire. Who is this? Adrian Cole. He's consulting on the accessibility initiative. I don't recall the board approving a consultant. The board doesn't approve my consultants. Richard's expression hardened. Ms. Vaughn, you're allowing your personal feelings to cloud your judgment. I understand you had a traumatic experience, but that's not a reason to dismantle a successful business model. Well, the business model is killing people, Adrian said. The business model is saving lives by funding the development of new treatments. By denying those treatments to the people who need them most. Richard stood up. I don't know who you are or what your qualifications are, but you clearly don't understand how this industry works. I understand exactly how it works, Adrian said. I watched it kill my wife. The room went silent. Claire had told the board members about Adrian's background in the briefing document she'd sent before the meeting. But hearing him say it out loud was different. Richard sat down slowly. I'm sorry for your loss, he said, and he actually sounded sincere. But personal tragedy doesn't qualify you to make billion-dollar business decisions. He's not making the decisions, Claire said. I am. Then you're making the wrong ones. That's your opinion. It's the opinion of everyone at this table. Claire looked around the room. Is it? Nobody spoke, but nobody disagreed either. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence, Richard said. Claire's expression didn't change, but Adrian saw her hands tighten on the edge of the table. You can call for whatever you want, she said. But unless you have majority support, it doesn't matter. I have 8 votes. That's more than half the board. The board doesn't have the authority to remove me as CEO. I'm the majority shareholder. Then we'll force a shareholder vote. Good luck with that. Richard stood again. Claire, I've known you since you were building this company in your dorm room. I've supported every major decision you've made, but this is different. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in 10 years. You're thinking emotionally, and emotion has no place in business. Claire stood up to face him. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe we've spent so long pretending business and humanity are separate things that we forgot they're not supposed to be. That's naive. Then I'm naive. Richard looked at the other board members. Anyone else want to try talking sense into her? Nobody moved. Fine, Richard said. I'll be contacting the other shareholders. We'll see how naive they think this plan is. He walked out. 4 other board members followed him. The remaining 10 sat there looking uncomfortable. Claire sat down and took a breath. Adrian could see her hands shaking slightly. Meeting adjourned, she said quietly. The board members filed out quickly, leaving Adrian and Claire alone in the conference room. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Claire said, That went worse than I expected. You expected it to go well? I expected some resistance, not a potential shareholder revolt. Adrian stood up and walked to the window. The city spread out below them, gray and wet and indifferent. You could still back down, he said. Tell them you were testing their reaction. Go back to the old model. Is that what you want me to do? No, but I want you to know what you're risking. Claire joined him at the window. I know what I'm risking, everything I've built, my reputation, my career. Why are you willing to lose all that? She was quiet for a moment. Because I looked at myself in the mirror after that board meeting 3 weeks ago, and I didn't recognize the person looking back. I turned into exactly the kind of person I used to hate. And you think this will fix that? I think it's the only chance I have. Adrian believed her, which scared him because it meant this wasn't just some guilt-driven impulse. Claire was serious. She was actually willing to destroy everything she'd built to try to make something better. And that meant Adrian was in this too, whether he wanted to be or not. The shareholder revolt started 48 hours later. Richard Castellano organized a coalition of investors who collectively owned 38% of Helix Biosolutions. They issued a public statement calling Claire's accessibility initiative financially reckless and a betrayal of shareholder trust. The stock price dropped 12% in one day. The news outlets picked up the story immediately. Business analysts called it corporate suicide. Financial reporters wrote think pieces about how Claire Vaughn was destroying her own empire. Adrian watched it all unfold from his apartment in Renton while trying to help Emma with her homework. His phone kept buzzing with notifications, texts from Marcus asking if he was okay, emails from reporters who'd somehow gotten his contact information, calls from numbers he didn't recognize. He ignored all of it. "Daddy, you're not listening," Emma said. "Sorry, baby." "What?" "I need help with this math problem." Adrian looked at the worksheet, third grade multiplication. He'd been solving it in his head while watching his phone screen. 4 times 7 is 28, he said. "I know that part, but how do I show my work?" Adrian put his phone down and focused on his daughter. She was right. He hadn't been listening. "Okay," he said. "Show me what you've done so far." They worked through the problems together while the news about Helix continued to explode across his phone screen. By the time Emma finished her homework, 3 more board members had publicly sided with Richard Castellano. Claire was losing. Adrian put Emma to bed and then sat on the couch staring at his phone. He could walk away from this. Tell Claire he'd tried, but it wasn't working. Go back to delivering packages and barely surviving and pretending that was enough. But Emma's voice kept echoing in his head. "I hope you got the job. Then maybe we could get a place with heat that works." She deserved better than this apartment. Better than a father who was too broken to fight for anything. Adrian pulled up Claire's number and called her. She answered on the first ring. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Are you?" "I've been better." Adrian heard traffic in the background. "Where are you?" "Driving. I couldn't stay in my apartment. Too quiet." "Ooh. Where are you driving to?" "I don't know. Nowhere. Everywhere." She laughed, but it sounded hollow. "I'm losing my company, Adrian." "Not yet, you're not." Richard has enough support to force a shareholder vote. And if that happens, I'll lose. Most of the investors care more about dividends than people. So change their minds. How? Adrian stood up and walked to the window. Rain was falling again, turning the streetlights into blurred halos. "Show them it works," he said. "Don't just talk about helping people. Actually help them. Make it real." The program isn't scheduled to launch for another 2 months. Then launch it early. Claire was quiet for a moment. "That's insane. We're not ready. The infrastructure isn't in place. The partnerships with hospitals aren't finalized." "So finalize them. You're a billionaire CEO. You've built an empire from nothing. You're telling me you can't figure out how to give away medicine? It's not that simple. It never is. But you said you wanted to do this, so do it." He heard her take a breath. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said. She hung up. Adrian stood at the window for a long time, watching the rain and wondering if he'd just talked her into making an even bigger mistake. Claire didn't call the next day. Instead, she showed up at Adrian's apartment at 7 in the morning. He opened the door to find her standing in the hallway wearing jeans and a jacket instead of her usual suit. She looked exhausted and wired at the same time, like someone running on coffee and adrenaline. "I need your help," she said. "With what?" "Launching the program. Today." Adrian stared at her. "Today?" "You were right. I need to show people it works, and I can't do that from a boardroom." Emma appeared behind Adrian, still in her pajamas. "Daddy, who's that?" Claire looked at Emma, then back at Adrian. "I'm sorry, I should have called first." "It's fine." Adrian turned to Emma. "Go get dressed, baby. Mrs. Kim is taking you to school this morning." Emma looked between them suspiciously, then disappeared back into the bedroom. Adrian stepped into the hallway and pulled the door closed behind him. "What exactly are you planning?" he asked. "I'm going to Harborview Medical Center. I'm going to find patients who can't afford their medications, and I'm going to give them what they need for free." "Just like that?" "Just like that. Your board will lose their minds. They already have." Adrian studied her face. She was serious, completely serious. "You're really doing this," he said. "I'm really doing this. Are you coming?" He should say no. Should tell her this was crazy and reckless and wouldn't solve anything. But he'd spent 3 years playing it safe, and it had gotten him nothing except debt and exhaustion. "Give me 10 minutes, he said. 20 minutes later, they were in Claire's car heading toward Harborview. Claire was driving too fast and talking too fast, explaining her plan. "I've already contacted the hospital administration. They're not officially endorsing this, but they're not stopping it either. I've got a team bringing medication from our distribution center. We'll set up in the main lobby and see who shows up." "What if nobody shows up?" "They'll show up." She was right. By the time they arrived at Harborview, word had already spread. Social media did that. Someone had leaked Claire's plan, and now it was trending on Twitter. There were 50 people waiting outside the hospital entrance. By noon, there were 200. Claire had set up 3 folding tables in the main lobby with boxes of medication stacked behind them. She'd brought Marcus and 2 other employees to help process requests, but mostly it was just her. Standing there in jeans and a jacket, talking to people who couldn't afford insulin or chemotherapy or blood pressure medication, and personally handing them what they needed. No forms to fill out, no insurance verification, no bureaucracy, just medicine. Adrian watched her work and saw something he hadn't seen before. She wasn't acting like a CEO doing charity work. She was listening to people. Actually, listening. An older woman told her about rationing heart medication, and Claire's hands shook as she filled the prescription. A young father explained he'd been skipping his own diabetes treatment to afford his daughter's asthma inhaler, and Claire's eyes went red. She wasn't performing empathy. She was feeling it, and people noticed. By 3 in the afternoon, the crowd had grown to over 400 people. News cameras showed up. Reporters shouted questions. Hospital security had to set up barriers to manage the line. Adrian helped where he could, verifying prescriptions and directing people to the right table. His old nursing training kicked in automatically. He found himself talking to patients like he used to, before everything fell apart. It felt like remembering how to breathe. Around 4 o'clock, a woman approached Adrian's table. She was maybe 40. Thin, with tired eyes that reminded him of his own reflection. "I don't have a prescription," she said quietly, "but my son needs Immunotech 7. He has the same thing my husband had. The insurance company denied coverage." Adrian's chest went tight. Immunotech 7, the experimental treatment his wife had been denied, the medication that could have saved her. "What's your son's name?" Adrian asked. "Tyler. He's 12. Adrian looked over at Claire. She was helping an elderly man with Parkinson's medication, explaining how to adjust his dosage. "Wait here," Adrian said. He walked over to Claire and pulled her aside. "We have a problem," he said quietly. "What kind of problem?" "There's a woman here whose son needs Immunotech 7, the same treatment my wife was denied." Claire's face went pale. "We don't have that medication here. We shelved the research program." "I know." "Adrian, can you get it?" Claire looked at him for a long moment. "The research was shut down, but we still have the manufacturing protocols. I'd have to authorize restarting production." "So authorize it. It would cost $500,000 to produce enough for 1 patient, and there's no guarantee it would work." "Ishiki. My wife died because nobody was willing to try. Don't let this kid die for the same reason." Claire pulled out her phone and made a call. Adrian couldn't hear what she was saying, but he saw her pacing back and forth, her free hand clenched into a fist. After 5 minutes, she hung up. "It'll take 3 weeks to restart production," she said, "but I authorized it. The boy will get his treatment." Adrian felt something crack open in his chest. For 3 years, he'd carried the weight of his wife's death like a stone around his neck, and nothing had made it lighter. But this, knowing that some kid he'd never met might survive because Claire was willing to spend $500,000 on a treatment that might not even work, it didn't erase the pain, but it made it mean something. "Thank you," Adrian said. Claire nodded and went back to the tables. They worked until 8 o'clock that night, until every person in line had been helped. By the end, they distributed over $2 million worth of medication, for free. The news coverage was massive. Every major outlet ran the story. Social media exploded. Some people called Claire a hero. Others called it a publicity stunt. The stock price dropped another 8%. Richard Castellano issued a statement saying Claire had violated her fiduciary duty and demanding an emergency board meeting. But something else happened too. Other pharmaceutical companies started getting questions from their shareholders. Why aren't you doing this? If Helix can afford to help people, why can't you? Patients started showing up at other hospitals, asking if their insurance companies would match Helix's accessibility program. Politicians started making statements about healthcare reform. Claire had cracked something open, and people were noticing. Adrian got home after 10 that night. Emma was asleep on the couch with Mrs. Kim watching over her. He paid Mrs. Kim double her usual rate and apologized for being so late. After she left, Adrian sat on the couch next to his daughter and just watched her breathe. She looked peaceful, safe. He thought about the woman whose son needed Immunotech 7. Thought about how terrified she must be, watching her child fight the same disease that killed her husband. He knew that terror, had lived it. And maybe he could help make sure fewer people had to feel it. His phone buzzed. A text from Claire. Thank you for today. I couldn't have done it without you. Adrian stared at the message for a long time before responding. Yes, you could have, but I'm glad I was there. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then, me too. Adrian set his phone down and carried Emma to bed. She mumbled something about math homework, and he kissed her forehead and pulled the blanket up to her chin. When he went back to the living room, his phone was buzzing again. But it wasn't Claire this time. It was a number he didn't recognize. Against his better judgment, he answered. Mr. Cole? A woman's voice, professional, cold. Yeah, yes. My name is Victoria Vaughn. I'm Claire's older sister. Adrian sat up straight. Okay. I need to meet with you. Tomorrow morning. It's important. About what? About my sister. And the mistake you're both making. The line went dead. Adrian stared at his phone. He had a feeling things were about to get a lot more complicated. The next morning, Adrian met Victoria Vaughn at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill. She looked like Claire's opposite. Where Claire was sharp edges and controlled intensity, Victoria was smooth and polished and radiating the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. She was sitting at her corner table when Adrian arrived, drinking something that looked expensive. Mr. Cole, she said, not standing. Thank you for coming. Adrian sat down. You made it sound urgent. It is. Victoria set her cup down carefully. My sister is destroying the company my family built, and you're helping her do it. Your family? I thought Claire built Helix herself. She built it with our father's initial investment, with connections our family provided, with years of support and guidance. Victoria's smile was sharp. Claire likes to pretend she's self-made. But nobody becomes a billionaire without help. What do you want from me? I want you to walk away. Stop encouraging this reckless accessibility program. Let Claire come to her senses. She already has. Victoria leaned forward. Claire is having a crisis. She nearly died, and now she's trying to find meaning by throwing away everything she's worked for. You're enabling her self-destruction. I'm helping her actually help people. You're helping her commit professional suicide. Victoria pulled out her phone and slid it across the table. Do you know how many employees Helix has? Adrian looked at the screen. 4,000. 4,000 people with families and mortgages and bills. 4,000 people whose jobs depend on this company staying profitable. If Claire continues down this path, she'll destroy the company and all those people will suffer. That's not... It is. And you know it. Victoria took her phone back. I've done research on you, Mr. Cole. I know about your wife. I know what you've been through. And I understand why you want to punish the pharmaceutical industry. This isn't about punishment, isn't it? You get to tear down the system that failed your wife. Claire gets to feel like a hero. Meanwhile, thousands of people lose their livelihoods. Adrian wanted to argue, but he couldn't, because she had a point. What are you proposing? He asked. Walk away. I'll personally ensure you receive a settlement, $5 million. Enough to never worry about money again. Enough to give your daughter the life she deserves. $5 million. Adrian thought about Emma's broken jacket zipper, the heat that didn't work, the meals he skipped so she could eat. $5 million would solve every problem he had. Program. Tell her it's not working. Tell her she's making a mistake. She'll listen to you. Why would she listen to me? Victoria smiled. Because you saved her life. Because she trusts you. Because she sees you as the moral compass in all this. Adrian stood up. I'm not interested in your money. Mr. Cole, tell your sister I said no. He walked out of the coffee shop before Victoria could respond. His hands were shaking. $5 million. He just turned down $5 million. Emma would kill him if she ever found out. But he couldn't do it. Couldn't take money to betray the first thing that had mattered to him in 3 years. His phone rang before he made it to the bus stop. It was Claire. Victoria just called me, she said without preamble. She tried to bribe you. Yeah. Did you take it? No. Claire was quiet for a moment. Why not? Because I've spent 3 years letting life happen to me. I'm done with that. He could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Thank you, she said finally. For what? For not giving up on this. I could say the same to you. Adrian? She paused. Victoria isn't going to stop. She's my older sister. She's always thought she should be running the company instead of me. This is her chance to prove it. What are you going to do, Keys? I don't know, but I know I can't do it alone. Adrian looked at the gray Seattle sky, at the rain starting to fall again. You're not alone, he said. And for the first time since his wife died, he actually meant it. The emergency shareholder meeting was scheduled for Friday at 2 in the afternoon. Claire spent the week preparing her defense while watching her company tear itself apart. Half the executives supported her. The other half quietly aligned with Richard Castellano and Victoria, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. The stock price continued dropping. Analysts predicted Helix would lose a third of its value by the end of the quarter. Adrian kept working his delivery job during the day and helping Claire strategize at night. They'd meet after Emma went to sleep, usually at a diner near his apartment because Claire refused to make him come downtown every time. On Wednesday night, she showed up looking worse than he'd ever seen her. No makeup, hair pulled back messily, dark circles under her eyes. You look terrible, Adrian said. Thanks. That's exactly what I needed to hear. She slid into the booth across from him and ordered black coffee from the waitress. It was 11 at night, and the diner was almost empty except for a few truck drivers and a guy sleeping in the corner booth. How bad is it, Adra? Adrian asked. Claire pulled out her tablet and showed him the shareholder breakdown. Richard has secured 46% of the voting shares. I have 42%. The remaining 12% are undecided. So you need to convince the undecided voters, or I need to buy them out before Friday. Can you do that? Legally? Yes. Practically? She rubbed her face. I'd have to liquidate most of my personal assets. Sell my apartment, my investments, everything. Would it be enough? Maybe. But even if I win the vote, I'll have burned every bridge I have in this industry. Nobody will want to work with me. Investors will see me as unstable. The company will survive, but I'll be fighting these battles forever. Adrian sipped his coffee. It tasted like burnt rubber, but he drank it anyway. So why keep fighting? He asked. Claire looked at him like he'd suggested she stop breathing. Because I can't go back to being the person I was before. I've seen too much. She gestured at nothing, at everything. That woman at Harborview whose son needed Immunotech 7, I keep thinking about her, about how many other people are out there right now, scared and desperate, being told their life isn't worth the cost. You can't save everyone. I know, but I can save some people, and that has to be enough. The waitress refilled their coffee and disappeared back behind the counter. Adrian watched Claire stare into her cup like she was reading tea leaves. Can I ask you something? He said. Yeah. Why does your sister hate you so much? Claire laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Victoria doesn't hate me. She just thinks she deserves what I have. Does she? Maybe. She's brilliant, ruthless. She worked at Helix for 5 years before I forced her out. You fired your own sister? She was embezzling funds to start her own competing company. I gave her a choice. Leave quietly or I'd press charges. Claire shrugged. She chose to leave, but she's been waiting for me to fail ever since. And now you're handing her the opportunity. Looks that way. Kanki. Adrian leaned back against the worn vinyl booth. For what it's worth, I don't think you're failing. The stock price disagrees with you. The stock price doesn't measure the right things. Claire smiled slightly. It was the first time he'd seen her smile in days. You sound like my father, she said. Is that good or bad? I'm not sure yet. They sat in silence for a while, drinking terrible coffee and watching the rain run down the windows. Then Claire said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Okay, do you think I'm doing this for the right reasons, or am I just trying to make myself feel better about almost dying? Adrian thought about it. I think both things can be true, he said finally. You can be scared of your own mortality and still want to help people. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. But which one is driving this? Does it matter? The people getting free medication don't care why you're helping them. They just care that you are. Claire nodded slowly. My therapist said something similar. You have a therapist? Started seeing one after the plane thing. Turns out almost dying gives you some stuff to work through. Yeah, it does. They finished their coffee and Claire paid the bill, even though Adrian insisted on splitting it. Outside, the rain had turned into a drizzle. I should go, Claire said. Early meeting tomorrow with the legal team. Good luck. She started toward her car, then stopped and turned back. Adrian? Yeah? Thank you. For not walking away when Victoria offered you the money. A lot of people would have taken it. I'm not a lot of people. No, you're not. She got in her car and drove away, taillights disappearing into the wet Seattle night. Adrian stood there for a moment, then started the long walk back to his apartment. The bus had stopped running an hour ago and he couldn't afford a taxi. He didn't mind. The walk gave him time to think. On Thursday morning, Victoria made her move. She leaked internal Helix financial documents to the Wall Street Journal, showing that the accessibility program had cost the company $800 million in projected revenue over the next fiscal year. The article went viral immediately. Business news channels ran segments about Claire's reckless philanthropy, destroying shareholder value. Financial experts called it the worst corporate decision since New Coke. By noon, 3 more board members had publicly switched their support to Richard Castellano. Claire was losing. Adrian found out about it while delivering packages in Queen Anne. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Text messages from Marcus. Missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize. A voicemail from Claire that just said, call me back. He finished his route early and called her from his van. It's over, she said without preamble. Victoria leaked the financials. Richard has 51% of the vote now. Can you buy out any more shareholders? Not in time. The meeting is tomorrow. Dick. Adrian heard something in her voice he hadn't heard before. Defeat. So what are you going to do? He asked. I don't know. My lawyers are looking for options, but realistically, I'm going to lose my company tomorrow. I'm sorry. Don't be. I knew this was a possibility when I started. She took a shaky breath. I just thought I had more time. Claire, but I need to go. My legal team is calling. She hung up. Adrian sat in his delivery van in front of a house in Queen Anne and tried to figure out what the hell he could do to help. He couldn't buy out shareholders, couldn't influence the board, couldn't stop Victoria from sabotaging her own sister. But he could do one thing. He could show up. That night, Adrian called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. Then he spent 4 hours making phone calls. He called the woman from Harborview whose son needed Immunotech 7. Called the elderly man with Parkinson's who Claire had helped. Called every single person he could find who'd benefited from the accessibility program. By midnight, he'd reached 43 people. By morning, he'd reached 78. He didn't sleep. The shareholder meeting was held in the main conference hall at Helix headquarters. 200 people packed into a room designed for half that many. Shareholders, board members, executives, lawyers, and a small army of reporters who'd somehow gotten past security. Claire sat at the front table with her legal team, looking composed and professional in a navy suit, but Adrian could see the tension in her shoulders. Richard Castellano sat across from her with Victoria beside him, both of them looking like they'd already won. Adrian stood in the back of the room, watching. The meeting started at 2 o'clock sharp. Richard wasted no time. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today because the current CEO of Helix Biosolutions has made a series of decisions that directly contradict her fiduciary responsibility to this company and its shareholders. He pulled up a presentation on the screen behind him, charts showing declining stock prices, projected revenue losses, analyst reports predicting further decline. Ms. Vaughn's so-called accessibility initiative has cost this company $800 million in less than a month. That's not charity. That's financial negligence. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Richard continued. Furthermore, she has authorized the restart of a discontinued research program at a cost of $500,000 for a single patient, a treatment that was deemed financially unviable years ago. More murmurs. This is not how you run a business, Richard said. This is how you destroy one. He sat down. All eyes turned to Claire. She stood slowly and walked to the front of the room. For a moment, she just looked at everyone staring at her. Then she said, "Everything Richard just told you is true." The room went silent. I did authorize the accessibility program. I did restart the Immunotech 7 research. And yes, it has cost this company hundreds of millions of dollars in projected revenue. She pulled up her own presentation. But here's what Richard didn't tell you. In the 4 weeks since we launched the program, patient satisfaction with Helix products has increased by 42%. Brand perception has improved by 38%. And we've received partnership requests from 15 major hospital systems who want to implement similar programs. New charts appeared on the screen. The short-term revenue loss is real, but the long-term value of being the first pharmaceutical company to prioritize accessibility over profit, that's incalculable. Someone in the crowd shouted, "How do we know this isn't just a PR stunt?" Claire nodded. Fair question, and the answer is you don't. You have to decide whether you trust me. Why should we? Another shareholder called out. Claire looked directly at them. Because in 10 years, when you look back at this moment, do you want to be part of the company that changed healthcare for the better? Or do you want to be just another pharmaceutical company that got rich while people died? Richard stood up. This is exactly the kind of emotional manipulation I'm talking about. Ms. Vaughn is asking you to sacrifice your investments for some nebulous future benefit. I'm asking them to invest in humanity, Claire shot back. Humanity doesn't pay dividends. Maybe it should. The room erupted into arguments. Shareholders shouting at each other, board members yelling over them. It was chaos. Then the doors at the back of the room opened. Adrian had been waiting for this moment. 78 people walked into the conference hall. The woman with the son who needed Immunotech 7, the elderly man with Parkinson's, a young mother holding a toddler, a veteran in a wheelchair, dozens of others. Everyone Adrian had called the night before. The room went quiet. The woman with the sick son walked to the front. She was shaking, but her voice was steady. My name is Jennifer Torres. My 12-year-old son, Tyler, has an autoimmune disorder. Every insurance company we applied to denied coverage for the treatment he needs. They said it was too expensive, too experimental, too risky. She looked at Claire. Ms. Vaughn didn't just approve the treatment. She personally called me to explain the timeline. She sent a doctor to evaluate Tyler. She's paying $500,000 for a medication that might not even work because she believes my son deserves a chance to live. Jennifer turned to face the shareholders. Jennifer, I don't know anything about stock prices or revenue projections, but I know that this company saved my son's life. And if you remove Ms. Vaughn as CEO, you're telling every other parent out there that their child isn't worth saving. She stepped back. The elderly man with Parkinson's came forward next. I'm Robert Chen. I've been rationing my medication for 3 years because I can't afford it on my fixed income. I was taking 1 pill every 3 days instead of 1 every day. My hands shook so bad I couldn't hold a fork. He held up his hands. They were steady. Ms. Vaughn gave me a year's supply for free. No forms, no questions, just medicine. And for the first time in 3 years, I can eat dinner without spilling food all over myself. One by one, the others came forward. A diabetic who'd been diluting insulin, a cancer patient who'd skipped chemotherapy, a child with asthma who'd been sharing an inhaler with her brother. 78 stories, 78 lives that had been changed by Claire's program. By the time they finished, half the shareholders were crying. Victoria was staring at Claire with an expression Adrian couldn't read. Anger, maybe. Or something closer to respect. Richard Castellano looked like he'd been punched. Claire stood at the front of the room, tears running down her face, not bothering to wipe them away. The chairman of the board, an older woman named Margaret Wu, stood up. "I think we've heard enough," she said quietly. "Let's vote." The vote took 15 minutes. When Margaret announced the results, her voice was shaking slightly. 54% in favor of maintaining current leadership. Ms. Vaughn remains CEO of Helix Biosolutions. The room erupted again, but this time it was different. Half the shareholders were applauding. The other half were gathering their things and leaving, including Richard Castellano. Victoria stayed seated, staring at Claire. Claire walked over to her. "You won," Victoria said flatly. "We both lost something today, Claire," Claire replied. "Did we?" Claire sat down beside her sister. Adrian couldn't hear what they said to each other, but he saw Victoria's expression soften slightly. Then Victoria stood and walked out without looking back. Claire stayed in her seat for a long moment, surrounded by shareholders congratulating her and reporters shouting questions. Then she looked up and found Adrian in the crowd. Their eyes met across the room. She mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Adrian nodded. He slipped out the back exit before anyone could ask him questions. Outside, it was raining again. Of course it was. He stood on the sidewalk and let the rain soak through his jacket while he called Emma's school to let them know he'd pick her up on time today. His hands were shaking. They'd actually won. Against every odd, against every logical prediction, they'd won. It didn't feel real. His phone buzzed. A text from Claire. "Dinner tonight? My treat. Bring Emma." Adrian stared at the message for a long time before responding. She'd like that. But, then he walked to the bus stop and headed home, feeling lighter than he had in 3 years. That evening, Claire picked them up in her car and drove them to a restaurant in Ballard that overlooked the Sound. It was the kind of place where the menu didn't list prices and the waiters wore ties. Emma's eyes went wide when they walked in. "Daddy, this place looks expensive," she whispered. "It's okay, baby. Ms. Vaughn is paying." Claire smiled. "Order whatever you want, Emma." Ushwoots. Emma ordered chicken fingers and fries because she was 7, and that's what 7-year-olds order everywhere. Adrian got a burger. Claire ordered salmon she barely touched. They ate mostly in silence, the exhaustion of the past month catching up with all of them. After dinner, Emma fell asleep in the car on the way home. Adrian carried her up to their apartment while Claire waited in the hallway. When he came back out, Claire was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall. "You okay?" he asked. "I don't know. Ask me tomorrow." Adrian sat down beside her. The hallway smelled like old carpet and someone's cooking. The fluorescent light overhead flickered intermittently. It was about as far from Claire's penthouse apartment as you could get. "This is where you've been living?" she asked. "Yeah." "The heat doesn't work." "I know." "The carpet is from 1987. Probably earlier." Claire was quiet for a moment. "You turned down $5 million to keep living here." "I turned down $5 million to keep doing something that mattered." Most people wouldn't make that choice. Most people aren't broke enough to know that money doesn't actually fix anything. Claire looked at him. "What does fix things?" Adrian thought about it. "I'm still figuring that out." They sat in the hallway for another 20 minutes, not talking, just existing in the same space while the building settled around them. Then Claire stood up. "I should go. Tomorrow's going to be insane." "Yeah." She started toward the stairs, then stopped. "Adrian?" "Yeah?" "I meant what I said before. We're partners in this. Not boss and employee." "I know." "Good. Because I'm about to do something crazy and I need you to tell me if I'm making a mistake." "What are you planning?" "Well," Claire smiled. It was a real smile this time, not the professional mask she usually wore. "I'm going to offer you a job, actually helping run the accessibility program, full-time, real salary, benefits, the works." Adrian's stomach dropped. "Claire, before you say no, hear me out. I can't do this alone. I need someone who understands what it's like to be on the other side of this industry. Someone who will tell me when I'm wrong. Someone who actually gives a damn about the people we're supposed to be helping." I'm not qualified for that. You saved my life with 60 seconds and a half-remembered medical degree. I think you're more qualified than you give yourself credit for. Basim, Adrian looked back at his apartment door, at the peeling paint and the broken doorknob he'd been meaning to fix for 6 months. Emma deserved better than this. She deserved heat that worked and a father who wasn't exhausted all the time, and maybe a future that didn't involve choosing between rent and food. What's the salary? He asked. Enough to move out of this building and into somewhere with functioning utilities. That's not a number, set. $200,000 a year to start, with performance bonuses. Adrian nearly fell over. $200,000. That was more than he'd made in the last 5 years combined. I can't accept that, he said. Why not? Because I don't deserve it. What? Claire stepped closer. You saved 78 people's lives today by making a bunch of phone calls in the middle of the night. You kept me from giving up when my entire board turned against me. You turned down a bribe that would have solved all your problems because you believed in doing the right thing. She looked him dead in the eye. If you don't deserve it, then nobody does. Adrian wanted to argue. Wanted to tell her he was just a burned-out former nurse who'd gotten lucky on an airplane. But the truth was, he was tired of struggling. Tired of delivering packages for minimum wage while his daughter wore a jacket with a broken zipper. Tired of pretending survival was the same thing as living. Okay, he said. Okay, I'll take the job. Claire's entire face lit up. Really? Yeah, really. She hugged him. It was quick and unexpected and completely unprofessional, but Adrian hugged her back anyway. When she pulled away, she was crying. Thank you, she said. For what? For not letting me quit. Adrian watched her walk down the stairs and out into the rain, back to whatever version of her life existed outside this building. Then he went back inside his apartment and looked around. The cracked ceiling, the stained carpet, the radiator that hadn't worked in 2 years. Soon, they'd be gone. He and Emma would move somewhere better, somewhere warm, somewhere that felt like a home instead of just a place to sleep between shifts. His phone buzzed one more time. Another text from Claire. Monday morning, 9 a.m., welcome to Helix. Adrian set his phone down and went to check on Emma. She was sprawled across her bed, still fully dressed, snoring softly. He pulled her shoes off and covered her with a blanket. We're going to be okay, baby, he whispered. And for the first time in 3 years, he actually believed it. Adrian's first day at Helix Biosolutions started with him getting lost in the building for 20 minutes. The office took up 3 entire floors, and he couldn't figure out which elevator bank went where. He finally found the right conference room at 9:15, out of breath and feeling like an idiot. Claire was already there with Marcus and 2 other people Adrian didn't recognize. Sorry I'm late, Adrian said. I couldn't find the room. Hey, you're fine. We're still waiting on legal anyway. Claire gestured to an empty chair. Sit. Coffee's on the table. The coffee was better than the burnt sludge from the diner. Adrian poured himself a cup and tried not to feel completely out of place. Everyone else was wearing business casual. Adrian had on jeans and the nicest shirt he owned, which was a button-down he'd bought at Target 3 years ago. He looked like someone's dad at a parent-teacher conference, not a pharmaceutical executive. The legal team arrived 10 minutes later, and the meeting started. They spent 2 hours going over the expansion plan for the accessibility program, which hospitals to partner with, how to structure the medication distribution, what kind of oversight they needed to prevent fraud. Adrian understood maybe half of it, but when they started talking about eligibility requirements and income verification, he spoke up. That's not going to work, he said. Everyone looked at him. What do you mean? One of the lawyers asked. All these verification processes, income documentation, medical records, you're creating the same bureaucratic nightmare that keeps people from getting help in the first place. The lawyer frowned. We need some kind of verification system. Otherwise, anyone could claim they need free medication. So let them. That's not financially sustainable. Neither is making sick people jump through hoops to prove they're poor enough to deserve treatment. Claire leaned forward. What are you suggesting? Trust people. If someone says they can't afford their medication, believe them. Give them what they need. That's incredibly naive, the lawyer said. Maybe, but it's also human. The room went quiet. Claire looked at her legal team. How much fraud are we realistically expecting? Industry standard is around 12%. So 88% of people are being honest. And we're going to punish all of them to prevent the 12% from taking advantage? The lawyer opened his mouth, then closed it. We'll keep it simple, Claire said. Self-reporting only. If someone asks for help, we help them. Adrian's right. The bureaucracy is the problem. The lawyers looked unhappy, but they made notes. The meeting went on for another hour. By the end, Adrian's head hurt, and he'd drunk 4 cups of coffee. When everyone filed out, Claire stayed behind. How are you doing? She asked. Honestly, I have no idea what I'm doing. Good. That means you're paying attention. She closed her laptop. The people who think they know everything are the ones who screw up. That's not reassuring. It's not supposed to be. This job is going to be hard. You're going to make mistakes, but you're also going to help people in ways that actually matter. Adrian looked around the empty conference room. I keep waiting for someone to realize I don't belong here. You belong here more than anyone. You've lived what we're trying to fix. That doesn't make me qualified to fix it. Claire stood up. Qualification is overrated. Caring is underrated. You care more than anyone I've ever worked with. That counts for something. She left before Adrian could respond. He sat there for a while, staring at his coffee cup and trying to convince himself he hadn't made a massive mistake. The first month was brutal. Adrian worked 12-hour days learning how pharmaceutical distribution worked, how hospital partnerships operated, how insurance companies structured their denial processes. It was overwhelming and exhausting and completely different from anything he'd ever done. But it was also working. The accessibility program expanded to 43 hospitals across 6 states. They'd helped over 2,000 patients in the first month alone. The media coverage was mostly positive. Even some of Claire's harshest critics admitted the program was making a difference. The stock price stabilized. Helix wasn't hemorrhaging money anymore. They were profitable again, just less obscenely so. Adrian moved out of the Renton apartment into a 2-bedroom place in West Seattle with actual heat and windows that didn't leak when it rained. Emma got her own room for the first time in her life. She cried when she saw it. It's so big, she said, standing in the middle of the empty space. You like it? I love it. Adrian bought her a new bed and a desk for homework and let her pick out paint colors for the walls. She chose purple, bright, obnoxious purple that hurt to look at. He painted it anyway. Things were getting better, but Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that it was all temporary, that any day now something would go wrong and everything would collapse. The collapse came in March, 6 months after Adrian started at Helix. Tyler Torres, the 12-year-old boy whose mother had spoken at the shareholder meeting, died from complications related to his autoimmune disorder. The Immunotech 7 treatment hadn't worked. Adrian found out when Jennifer Torres called him directly. She was crying so hard he could barely understand her. He fought so hard, she kept saying. He fought so hard. Adrian sat in his office with the door closed and listened to her grief pour through the phone line. There was nothing he could say that would help. No words that would bring her son back. When she finally hung up, Adrian sat there staring at nothing. They'd spent $500,000 on a treatment that failed. They'd given Jennifer hope. They'd made her believe her son would survive, and he died anyway. Adrian's phone rang again, Claire this time. I heard, she said quietly. Yeah. Are you okay? No. Me neither. They sat in silence on the phone for a long moment. I need to tell you something, Claire said finally, and I need you to listen without interrupting. Okay. This is going to happen again. We're going to help people, and some of them are still going to die. We're going to fund treatments that don't work. We're going to give people hope, and sometimes that hope is going to be false. Adrian's throat was tight. And that's going to hurt, Claire continued, every single time. But we can't let it stop us from trying. Jennifer trusted us. Her son trusted us. I know, and we did everything we could. That has to be enough. It's not enough. He's dead. He would have died sooner without the treatment. We gave him 6 more months with his mother. 6 months he wouldn't have had if we'd done nothing. Adrian knew she was right, but it didn't make it hurt less. I need to go, he said. Adrian. He hung up. Then he left the office and drove to Harborview Medical Center where Tyler had died. He found Jennifer in the waiting room, surrounded by family members Adrian didn't recognize. She saw him and stood up. I'm so sorry, Adrian said. Jennifer hugged him. She was shaking. Thank you for trying, she whispered. Thank you for giving him a chance. Adrian held her while she cried and felt his own tears finally break through. He'd spent 3 years not crying about his wife. 3 years keeping everything locked down because falling apart meant he couldn't take care of Emma. But now, standing in this hospital, holding a stranger who'd lost her child the same way he'd lost his wife, everything broke open. They stood there crying together while hospital staff and visitors walked past, pretending not to notice. After a while, Jennifer pulled back. Tyler wanted me to tell you something, she said, before he died. What? He said to tell the man who helped his mom that he wasn't scared anymore, that knowing people cared made it easier, and Adrian's chest felt like it was caving in. He was a good kid, he managed to say. Yeah, he was. Jennifer's mother came over and gently guided her back to her family. Adrian stood there alone in the waiting room, surrounded by people waiting for news about their own loved ones. Some of them would get good news, some wouldn't. That's just how it worked. He drove home in the rain and found Emma doing homework at the kitchen table. She looked up when he came in. Daddy, why are you crying? Someone I was trying to help died today. Emma put down her pencil. I'm sorry. Yeah, me too. She came over and hugged him. She was getting taller. In another year or two, she'd probably be as tall as him. You tried to help them, though, right? She asked. Yeah. Then it's not your fault. Adrian held his daughter and wondered when she'd gotten so wise. That night, after Emma went to bed, Adrian sat on the couch and stared at his phone. He wanted to call Claire, wanted to apologize for hanging up on her, but he didn't know what to say. The truth was, she was right. This was going to happen again. People were going to die despite their best efforts, and they'd have to keep trying anyway. That was the job. His phone buzzed, a text from Claire. Tyler's funeral is Friday. I'm going. You should come too. Adrian texted back, Okay, et miskin. Then, I'm sorry for hanging up earlier. Claire's response came immediately. Don't be. You're allowed to be human. The funeral was small, just family and a few friends and the 2 people from a pharmaceutical company who'd tried to save Tyler's life. Jennifer saw them in the back of the church and came over. Thank you for coming, she said. Of course, Claire said. They sat through the service together. The minister talked about Tyler's love of basketball and video games and how he'd made everyone laugh even when he was sick. Adrian thought about his wife's funeral, how empty it had felt, how angry he'd been at everyone who said she was in a better place or at peace now. Death wasn't peaceful, it was just absence. After the service, Jennifer pulled Claire and Adrian aside. I want you to keep doing what you're doing, she said. I know Tyler's treatment didn't work, but you gave him hope. You made him feel like his life mattered enough for someone to fight for it. It did matter, Claire said. He mattered. I know. And I need you to remember that when you're helping the next kid, because there's going to be a next kid. And they're going to need people like you who give a damn. She hugged them both and then went back to her family. Adrian and Claire stood in the church parking lot while rain started to fall. She's stronger than I am, Claire said quietly. I don't think so. I think she's just had more practice at this kind of pain. They drove back to Seattle in Claire's car. Adrian watched the rain run down the windows and thought about all the things he wanted to say and couldn't figure out how to. Finally, he just said, I'm glad we tried to help him, even though it didn't work. Me too, but it still hurts. Yeah, it does. Claire pulled into the parking lot at Adrian's building, but didn't turn off the car. Can I tell you something? She asked. Yeah, I used to think the worst thing I could do was fail, that if I wasn't perfect, if I didn't win every time, then I wasn't worth anything. She stared straight ahead at the rain. But Tyler's death taught me something. Trying and failing is still better than not trying at all. You really believe that? I have to. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? Adrian didn't have an answer to that. He got out of the car and watched Claire drive away, then went inside and found Emma asleep on the couch with her homework half finished. He carried her to bed and finished her math problems for her because he was a terrible parent who enabled her procrastination. But he was there, and that had to count for something. The months after Tyler's funeral were hard. The media, which had been mostly supportive of the accessibility program, turned critical. Articles questioning whether Helix was giving false hope to desperate patients. Opinion pieces about the ethics of funding experimental treatments. The stock price dipped again. 2 board members resigned. But Claire kept pushing forward. They expanded the program to 12 more states, partnered with 20 additional hospitals, helped another 5,000 patients. Some of them died. Most of them didn't. And slowly, something started to shift. Other pharmaceutical companies started launching their own accessibility programs. Not because they wanted to, but because their shareholders started demanding it. Politicians started talking about healthcare reform. Patient advocacy groups started organizing. The entire industry was changing. Not quickly, not perfectly, but changing. Adrian spent most of his time now traveling to hospitals, talking to patients, figuring out what they needed and how to get it to them. It was exhausting work, but it mattered. 1 year after Tyler Torres died, Adrian got a call from Jennifer. "I wanted you to know something," she said. "I started a foundation in Tyler's name to help other families pay for experimental treatments." "That's amazing. I couldn't have done it without you and Claire showing me it was possible, that people actually could help each other without expecting anything in return." Adrian felt his throat tighten. "Tyler would be proud of you." "I hope so. I really hope so." After they hung up, Adrian sat in his office and thought about how grief could turn into something useful, how pain could become purpose if you let it. His wife's death had nearly destroyed him, but it had also led him here, to this job, to helping people who were fighting the same battles she'd fought. He couldn't save her, but maybe he could save someone else's wife, someone else's son, someone else's family. That had to be enough. 1 year and 3 months after Adrian started working at Helix, Claire called him into her office. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Okay. How do you feel about flying?" Adrian's stomach dropped. "Why?" "There's a national healthcare conference in Denver next week. I think we should both go. Present what we've been doing. Show other companies it's possible." "Well, you want me to speak in front of people?" "I want us to speak together. Show them this isn't just corporate PR, that we actually give a damn." Adrian thought about it. "Can I bring Emma?" Claire smiled. "Of course." The conference was massive. 3,000 healthcare executives and policymakers from across the country, all gathered in a convention center in downtown Denver. Adrian had never been to anything like it. He felt completely out of his depth. But Emma loved it. She spent the whole first day exploring the convention center and collecting free pens from pharmaceutical company booths. On the second day, Adrian and Claire gave their presentation. They stood on stage in front of 800 people and talked about the accessibility program, about what they'd learned, about the patients they'd helped and the ones they'd lost. Adrian talked about Tyler Torres, about how his death had hurt but hadn't been meaningless, about how giving people hope, even false hope, was still better than giving them nothing. When he finished, the room was silent. Then someone started clapping. Then everyone was clapping. Adrian and Claire walked off stage together, and Emma was waiting in the wings, grinning. "You were great, Daddy." "Thanks, baby." They grabbed dinner at the hotel restaurant that night. Emma ordered chicken fingers again. Some things never changed. Adrian and Claire talked about the conference, about which companies seemed interested in implementing similar programs, about what came next. It felt easy, natural, like they'd been doing this together for years instead of just 18 months. After dinner, they walked Emma back to her room and Adrian tucked her in. "Can I ask you something?" Emma said. "Of course." "Do you like Ms. Vaughn?" Adrian's heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" Like her, the way grown-ups do." Adrian sat on the edge of the bed. "Why are you asking?" "Because you smile more when she's around, and you don't look sad all the time anymore. Out of the mouths of children. It's complicated, baby." "That's what grown-ups say when the answer is yes, but they don't want to admit it." Adrian laughed. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart. You just don't notice because you're old. I'm 34. Like I said, old." Adrian kissed her forehead. "Go to sleep." "Are you going to tell her?" "Tell her what?" "That you like her." "I don't know, maybe." You should. She likes you too. I can tell." Emma rolled over and closed her eyes, completely satisfied with her matchmaking efforts. Adrian went back to his own room and lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Did he like Claire? Yes. Obviously, yes. But it was complicated. She was his boss, his partner, the person who'd given him a second chance at a life that mattered. Starting something romantic felt like it would ruin all of that. His phone buzzed. A text from Claire. Can't sleep. Want to get a drink? Yeah. Adrian stared at the message. Then he texted back, Hotel bar, 20 minutes. The hotel bar was mostly empty. Just a few business travelers nursing whiskeys and a couple on a date in the corner booth. Claire was already there, sitting at the bar in jeans and a sweatshirt. Adrian had never seen her look so casual. Couldn't sleep either? She asked. Emma asked me if I liked you. Claire nearly choked on her wine. What did you say? I said it was complicated. Is it? Adrian sat down next to her. I don't know. Is it? The bartender came over and Adrian ordered a beer he had no intention of drinking. Claire was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I think about you constantly. About how you saved my life. About how you didn't give up on me when everyone else did. About how you make me want to be better than I am. Adrian's heart was pounding. But I'm terrified, Claire continued, because you work for me. Because we've built something important together. Because if this goes wrong, we lose everything. So what do we do? Claire looked at him. I don't know. What do you want to do? Adrian thought about his wife, about how he'd loved her completely and lost her anyway, about how grief had nearly killed him. He thought about Emma asking why he smiled more now. He thought about standing on stage today and feeling like he was finally doing something that mattered. I want to not be scared anymore, he said. Of what? Of caring about someone again, of losing them. Claire reached over and took his hand. I can't promise you won't lose me. None of us gets that promise. I know, but I can promise I'm not going anywhere by choice. You're stuck with me. Adrian squeezed her hand. That's a terrible promise. It's the only one I can make. They sat there holding hands at the hotel bar while CNN played silently on the TV above them, and a drunk businessman told the bartender about his ex-wife. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. The next morning, they boarded a flight back to Seattle. Emma sat between them, reading a book about dragons. Halfway through the flight, the pilot came over the intercom. Folks, we've got a medical emergency in the cabin. If there's a doctor or nurse on board, please press your call button. Adrian and Claire looked at each other. Then they both pressed their buttons. A flight attendant rushed over. Are you medical professionals? I'm a nurse, Adrian said. She's, capable. Well, there's a passenger having what looks like a heart attack. They followed the attendant to row 23, where a man in his 50s was clutching his chest, his face gray and sweating. Adrian dropped to his knees beside him. Sir, can you hear me? The man nodded. I'm going to help you. Just try to stay calm. Claire was already talking to the flight attendants, getting the emergency medical kit, coordinating with the pilots to make an emergency landing. Adrian checked the man's pulse, rapid and irregular, cardiac arrest. He'd done this before, on another plane, in another life. But this time, Claire was beside him. This time, he wasn't alone. They worked together, Adrian handling the medical emergency while Claire managed everything else. They got the man stabilized until the plane made an emergency landing in Salt Lake City. Paramedics boarded and took over. The man was alive, conscious. He looked at Adrian and Claire and said, Thank you. There's something. No. They took their seats while the plane refueled. Emma was staring at them with wide eyes. That was scary, she said. Yeah, baby, it was. But you saved him. Adrian looked at Claire. She was shaking slightly, adrenaline still coursing through her. We saved him, Adrian corrected. Together. Emma smiled. You guys make a good team. She went back to her book like nothing had happened. The plane took off again an hour later. This time, the flight was quiet. When they landed in Seattle, Emma fell asleep against Adrian's shoulder. Claire looked at them both. You know what she said to me while you were helping that man? What? She said her mom would be proud of you for saving people again. Adrian felt tears prick his eyes. He hadn't talked to Emma about her mother in months. Hadn't known she even remembered her that clearly. She talks about her sometimes. Claire said softly. About how her mom was sick and how you tried to help her but couldn't. When did she tell you that? A couple months ago. She asked me if I thought people could be happy again after losing someone they loved. What did you tell her? I told her I didn't know, but I thought maybe they could, if they found the right people to be happy with. Adrian looked at his sleeping daughter, at Claire sitting beside him, at the life he'd somehow built from the wreckage of the one he'd lost. It wasn't perfect. It was messy and complicated and sometimes painful. But it was his, and it was enough. When they got off the plane, Emma woke up just enough to walk to baggage claim. She held Adrian's hand on one side and Claire's on the other. Are we a family now? Emma asked sleepily. Adrian and Claire looked at each other. Maybe, Claire said gently. Would that be okay? Yeah, I think so. They collected their bags and walked out into the Seattle rain. Adrian had spent 3 years hating this city, hating the rain and the gray skies and everything that reminded him of what he'd lost. But standing here now, with his daughter and Claire beside him, he realized something. The rain hadn't changed. He had. He wasn't the broken man who'd boarded a flight a year ago, barely surviving, buried in grief. He was someone who'd learned that saving one life could matter just as much as saving 1,000. That trying and failing was better than not trying at all. That hope, even false hope, was worth giving. That people could be lost and found and lost again and somehow still find their way back to something like happiness. His wife was gone. That would never stop hurting. But he was still here. Emma was here. Claire was here. And they'd built something together that mattered. Not because it was perfect, but because it was human. Because they'd chosen to care about strangers when it would have been easier not to. Because they'd turned their pain into purpose. Because they'd learned that the worst thing you can do isn't failing, it's giving up. Adrian looked at Claire. She was smiling at him through the rain. What are you thinking? She asked. I'm thinking, I'm glad I didn't let you die on that plane. Me too. Emma tugged on both their hands. Can we go home now? I'm hungry. They walked to the parking garage together. Just 3 people who'd found each other in the middle of their worst moments and decided to keep trying anyway. The rain kept falling. It always did in Seattle. But for the first time in years, Adrian didn't mind.